After a good night's sleep, my first day in Alaska, I began my road trip heading towards where I would spend my first winter here. In the morning, I headed off to North Pole, which was a cute little town close by Fairbanks, to visit the famous Santa's house. After that, I headed back through Fairbanks and towards Nenana, stopping along the way at a souvenir shop called Skinny Dick's and George Park's Memorial Lot, as well as a small community called Esther. The view at George Park's Memorial Lot was beautiful, and Esther was the type of town I would live if I wanted to live right outside of Fairbanks. I was a bit disappointed with Nenana because previous YouTube videos I had watched made it seem much nicer than it was. There wasn't anything in particular that was bad about Nenana, it was just much more plain than I had imagined. I still enjoyed visiting it so that I could have my own experience there, but it's not a place I would be interested in living. After Nenana, I headed towards the interior of Alaska, and I was very excited because this is the part of Alaska that intrigues me the most. The first community I stopped at was called Clear, and because there's no actual statistics of how many people live there, I figured all that I would see would be forest, and that's exactly all you saw there. I know people live in this area, and I imagined it's deeper in the woods, as I saw no sign of any residents, or building, or people. After Clear, I came to the next small community called Ferry. Ferry also gave me what I had expected, a small pull-off on the side of the road where there were a row of mailboxes at the top of one dirt road leading somewhere back in the woods where the 17 residents of Ferry called home. At the top of the dirt road was a small bridge you could walk over into the community, but I chose not to cross the bridge because I figure those people live out there for a reason, and they don't want tourists or other people intruding on their privacy. "8 minutes further down the road, I came to the town that was made famous by the movie Into the Wild, Healy. Healy was also exactly what I expected. The majority of the community is untouched, and you do feel like you're in the middle of the wild. You actually are because it borders Denali National Park and is surrounded by nothing but forest and mountains. I did really enjoy Healy, and I especially liked how they had a grocery store and a couple of cafes and lodges right in the center, although all of the people live deep in the woods in the area surrounding the center. Most of the people who do live there do not have running water, and many of the people live in small cabins. There are also two small neighborhoods around Healy, June Creek Subdivision and McKinley Village, about 20 minutes away. I like how you do have a choice there, where you can live all alone down one of the several roads like Stampede Road. You can also live even further from people in one of the cabins only reachable by ATV, snowmobile, or walking. But you also have the option to live closer to other people, like in McKinley Village. Healy was one of my top 5 towns in Alaska where I would be interested in living. The landscape and the scenery there was breathtaking. After Healy, it was about a 45-minute drive to Cantwell, where roughly 200 people live. Although Cantwell didn't really impress me, the drive from Healy to Cantwell was one of the nicest drives during this trip. There were so many places to pull over. You wanted to stop your car every 2 minutes to take pictures of beautiful scenery and landscapes. After Cantwell, I drove over Broad Pass. Broad Pass is known for its abundance of blueberries, and many people will go there in the summertime to fill buckets and baskets of these berries. Unfortunately, I was there in early October, and I didn't have such an opportunity, but driving over Broad Pass was also one of my favorite stretches during this trip. After Broad Pass, I stopped at Igloo City, which is home to an abandoned motel shaped like an igloo that never opened after it was constructed. This is definitely a must-see attraction for any tourist. Just like Broad Pass, there's no official number of people who live in the Igloo City area, although people do live in places like Broad Pass and Igloo City, somewhere down dirt roads you do not find easily and deep into the woods. After Igloo City, I came upon Hurricane Gulch, which is known for its bridge. But I found the missing guardrails where you can look into the valley deep below a bit more exciting and nerve-wracking. It just seemed to me that the state of Alaska only half-heartedly made any safety precautions here. As I looked down into the valley, I wondered to myself how many tourists have gone missing in this spot. Hurricane Gulch is also known to have strong winds, and during the entire trip, this was the windiest area that I visited. Leaving Hurricane Gulch, I then drove to Veterans Memorial, and this had to be one of the nicest memorials I have ever seen. What was even more interesting was it was in the middle of nowhere, and I wondered how they brought up all the material, and I also thought it was a shame because it was so nice and so few people would see it. After Veterans Memorial, I drove to Trapper Creek, where the most popular consignment shop in Alaska is located, Walmike's. I stopped by there and spoke to the owner, as everyone seems to do in their YouTube videos, and just like you'd expect, he was extremely friendly and very talkative and very open and honest. Walmike's is really just a shop that is overrun with a ton of different types of items. Many nicer items and a lot of junk. Like most of the souvenir shops and small shops that you stop at in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, they are never pushing to sell you things. Most of the time it just seems like they'd rather talk than sell. And they always have such interesting stories and will continue talking until you finally say you have to get on your way now. But it's a lot of fun stopping in these types of places, and Walmike's is no different. The next community I arrived at was North Susitna. The population of North Susitna is 11, and what you would consider downtown was nothing more than a few abandoned buildings. When someone sees a video of this part of town on YouTube, it may look like a poor, run-down town to them, and I can understand why some people would think that way. But when I'm here, I see these places a bit differently. Places like North Susitna are some of the most fascinating places for me to visit, because when I stand in the middle of the empty abandoned town, and I imagine how this place looked like 20 years ago or 60 years ago, seeing people coming in and out of the buildings and the place having more life, I think when you see something that is abandoned, you have to dive deeper into your imagination if you want to appreciate what you're actually looking at. I also like the rustic feel that you get when you're in these types of communities. After North Susitna, I started heading a little bit more into civilization, coming to the town of Willow with a population of just over 2,000. From there, I drove to Wasilla with a population of 10,000 people. Both of these towns were like miniature cities to me. A bunch of fast food restaurants and a bunch of stores to buy stuff that you don't need. I didn't stay long in either of these two towns because I was more interested in the communities during this road trip, as I was going to select one of them to be my home after the winter passes by. From Wasilla, I headed to Nick River, which is a very popular area to boondock in Alaska. I'll definitely be back in the future to camp out there. Shortly after the Nick River, I came across Mirror Lake. This lake was the most awesome lake I have ever seen my whole life. When you looked at the lake, you saw the reflection of the mountains and the forest on top of the water, and it actually looked like you could walk right across the lake on top of mountains and trees. The video does not give this lake the justice that it deserves. I then came to the town of Chugiak, and although there are only 500 residents there, it seemed like a pretty large neighborhood. It was a nice area and definitely a place I would recommend someone living if they wanted to live close to Anchorage but not in the city itself. After Chugiak, I arrived at Eagle River, which is a bit closer to Anchorage and a bit larger than Chugiak was. There are roughly 25,000 people living here, but nothing in Eagle River really impressed me. Just like Wasilla and Willow, it's not that it was ugly or anything, but it was not why I was in Alaska and not why I would want to live in Alaska. After Eagle River, I went to Chugach State Park and had a nice relaxing break from my road trip. I then came to the largest city in Alaska, which is Anchorage. I personally like Fairbanks more, but Anchorage did offer a lot more for people who want convenience and to live around other people. The only positives I personally would give the big cities like Fairbanks and Anchorage is that 5 minutes after you leave the big cities, you really are in the middle of the woods with a feeling of being remote. It's amazing how close nothing is to something as big as Anchorage. In my next road trip video, I will be leaving Anchorage, continuing my journey to the town where I will be spending my first winter in Alaska.